June 6, 1940, 590 Madison Avenue, Manhattan. A package leaves the building, addressed to Adolf Hitler, Berlin. Inside is a medal, a white enameled cross trimmed in gold, small eagles between the arms, a ribbon of red, white, and black. The Merit Cross of the German Eagle with star, one of the highest honors the Reich could hang on a foreigner. The American story loves this moment. The tycoon of conscience, mailing a dictator his trinket back while France falls, and the newspapers applaud. Look at the Geneva ledgers instead. Same month, lease payments from Berlin received. Card royalties from Berlin received. Profit statements from a German subsidiary the sender still owned, received, filed, forwarded to New York. The metal traveled east. The money kept traveling west. 3 years before that package, the same man stood in a Berlin ballroom while Hitler's economics minister pinned that cross to his chest. 5 years after it, American soldiers fighting through the wreckage of the Reich kept finding heavy black machines in ministry basements and camp administration blocks, each one carrying a small metal plate stamped with the name of its owner. The owner was not the German government, and 60 years after that, a researcher walked out of the archives with 20,000 documents and noticed something strange about them. He could reconstruct, invoice by invoice, what the company had earned. What he could not find anywhere in any year was a single page asking what the cards were for. The man who mailed the package was Thomas J. Watson. The company was International Business Machines, IBM. And the question this video answers is the one the documents can actually answer. Not whether it was wrong, who really profited. Along the way, you'll meet one man with the same machines and the same customer who made the opposite choice and paid for it with his life. Set him aside for now. He is the measuring stick for everything else. It started with a census. But before the census, there was a machine. In 1880, the United States Census took nearly 8 years to count. By the time the clerks finished, the numbers were obsolete, and the 1890 count threatened to outlast the decade it was supposed to measure. A young engineer named Hermann Hollerith, the son of German immigrants, proposed something radical. Turn every human being into a pattern of holes. Each person became a stiff paper card. Each column was a question. Age, sex, birthplace, occupation, religion, whatever the state wished to know. Each punched hole was an answer. Feed the cards into his machine, and metal pins dropped through the holes, closed electrical circuits, and counted at speeds no army of clerks could touch. The 1890 census came in at a fraction of the time, but that was never the important part. The important part was that the machine could answer questions no government had ever been able to ask. Not how many people live in this city. Show me every foreign-born machinist in this district, sorted by age. The card didn't record a person. It made a person searchable. Hollerith's firm merged into a conglomerate, and in 1914 the conglomerate hired a disgraced star salesman named Thomas Watson, fresh off an antitrust conviction at his previous employer. Later thrown out on appeal. Watson took over, renamed the company International Business Machines in 1924, hung one-word signs reading "Thank" on every wall, and built the most aggressive sales force in America. We know exactly what he made, because in the mid-1930s Congress briefly forced big companies to publish executive pay. In 1934, at the bottom of the Depression, Watson's reported income was more than $360,000, the highest in the country. The papers did the arithmetic and called him the $1,000-a-day man. His contract gave him a personal cut of the profit IBM earned anywhere on Earth. Hold on to that clause. Anywhere on Earth. Now read the business model the way a lawyer would, because the model is the crime scene. IBM almost never sold a machine. It leased them. The tabulator humming in your office remained IBM's property. IBM engineers serviced it monthly. IBM instructors trained your staff. And the punch cards, the millions of cards the machines devoured, could come only from IBM, custom designed for each application, printed to tolerances nobody else could match, reordered forever. By the late 1930s, IBM's presses were turning out cards by the billion every year, and those plain slips of paper were among the most profitable things the company made. The customer never owned anything, not the machine, not the expertise, not the paper. Every question a government asked of its own data, it paid IBM for the privilege of asking, which is why people keep searching this story for the deal. One document, 2 signatures, Watson and Hitler. It does not exist, and looking for it misses the point. A deal ends. A subscription renews. In January 1933, a new subscriber arrived. On January 30th, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Within weeks came the boycotts of Jewish businesses, the purges of Jewish civil servants, the book fires. Foreign companies watched the calendar and got nervous. Some froze their German investments. Some quietly left. Now watch what Watson did with the same calendar. He expanded. IBM already had a German subsidiary, and its history matters. D. Homage, the German Hollerith Machine Company, founded in 1910 by a prickly businessman named Willy Heidinger, who licensed Hollerith's patents. When hyperinflation ruined him in 1922, IBM stepped in and took roughly 90% of his company. Heidinger stayed on to run it, nursing a grudge against New York that would smolder for 2 decades. Hold on to Heidinger. He detonates in 1940. In 1933, months into the new regime, Watson authorized pouring more than 7 million Reichsmarks into Die Homag, over $1 million at the time, including a new factory in the Berlin suburb of Lichterfelde. While other Americans hedged, IBM poured concrete. And almost immediately, the regime handed Die Homag the largest contract in its history, a census. That summer, Prussia, some 41 million people, was counted the way nothing had ever been counted before. Die Homag mobilized like an army. In a converted Berlin building, hundreds of temporary workers sat in rows under electric light, punching one card per human being, while the sorters rattled through the stacks at 24,000 cards an hour. On those cards, among the columns for age and address and occupation, was a column for religion. For the first time in history, a modern state held not a number of Jews, but a machine-readable list of them. Names, addresses, professions, families, cross-indexed and sortable at electric speed. A regime that had promised to remove Jews from German life now knew, with card file precision, exactly where German Jewish life was. Some German Jews read the meaning of that instantly. That same year, a businessman in Frankfurt named Otto Frank looked at what his country was becoming and got his family out. His wife Edith, his daughters Margot and Anne, a fresh start in Amsterdam. Set that family down somewhere. We'll need them, and here is what the vendor thought it was doing, in its own words. In January 1934, at the dedication of the new factory, swastika banners on the walls, Nazi officials in the audience, Willy Heidinger gave a speech. I'm quoting him, because paraphrase softens it. We are recording the individual characteristics of every single member of the nation onto a little card, he said. His company, he went on, was dissecting, cell by cell, the German cultural body, and delivering the results to the nation's physician, so the physician could take corrective procedures against the sick circumstances. The physician he meant was Adolf Hitler. Corrective procedures. Sick circumstances. That is the client relationship, described by the contractor, at a company event, on the record. And New York was watching, because New York read the statements. Die Homag's profits climbed into the millions of Reichsmarks a year. Germany grew into IBM's most profitable market outside the United States. And Watson, on his percentage, collected a personal commission on every card the Reich consumed. The clause said anywhere on Earth. Berlin was on Earth. Then the questions changed. In September 1935, the Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of citizenship and defined Jewishness not by faith, but by blood, by grandparents. The question was no longer who attends a synagogue. It was who had a Jewish grandmother in 1870. Answering that meant crawling through church registries, civil records, and genealogy files going back generations, then cross-referencing them against a living nation. By hand. Close to impossible. With tabulating machines, a workflow. The regime built race offices and ancestry registries and card indexes stacked on card indexes. And through Die Homag, IBM technology sat in the middle of the paper bloodstream. The machines were no longer counting Jews. They were helping to decide who was a Jew at all. This is the point where you'd expect an American icon to quietly back away. Instead, in June 1937, Thomas Watson sailed to Berlin to collect a medal. He arrived wearing two hats, president of IBM, and newly elected president of the International Chamber of Commerce, which was holding its World Congress in the Nazi capital. His slogan for the event, chosen without a flicker of irony, was world peace through world trade. The regime rolled out everything it had. Banquets, receptions, a parade of hospitality. Watson dined with ministers and was granted a private audience with Hitler himself. There will be no war, the dictator assured him. No country wants war. No country can afford it. Watson carried that message back to reporters like a courier delivering good news. And at a gala during the Congress, with economics minister Hjalmar Schacht presiding, the Reich pinned onto Thomas Watson the Merit Cross of the German Eagle with star, a decoration Hitler had created only weeks earlier for foreigners who had rendered service to the Reich. Watson was among its first recipients. Henry Ford and Charles Lindbergh got theirs the following year. Read the citation for what it actually is. Service to the Reich. The Reich chose those words carefully, and the service it had in mind was rattling away in offices across Germany at 24,000 cards an hour. By now, Hollerith machines ran calculations for the railways and processed statistics for ministries, insurers, and police agencies. When Germany swallowed Austria in 1938, the machines followed the tanks in. And after Kristallnacht in November 1938, the night synagogues burned in every German city and the glass of Jewish shopfronts carpeted the sidewalks. Some American firms finally recoiled in disgust. IBM stayed exactly where it was. Then, in May 1939, came the project that turns a customer relationship into something history cannot forgive. A new census. The entire Greater Reich this time. Roughly 80 million people. And attached to it, a supplementary card demanding, for every single person, the race and religion of all four grandparents. Read that card for what it actually is. The Nuremberg definition of Jewishness, converted into a national data collection event, feeding registries the security services would later mine whenever they needed names. Every deportation begins with a list. In 1939, Germany built the mother of all lists, and the tabulation came back carrying a number with a story inside it. In Hitler's first census, 500,000 Jews had lived in Germany. Now barely 330,000 remained. The rest had done what Otto Frank did. They had run, which means the new registry was not really a count of Germany's Jews at all. It was an inventory of the ones who had not escaped. 4 months later, the Wehrmacht crossed into Poland, and the Second World War began. Now I want to be exact about the sequence, because the sequence is the whole story. June 1940. France is falling. American opinion is boiling. Watson mails the medal back to Berlin, addressed to Hitler personally. The present policies of your government, he writes, are contrary to the causes for which I have been working. The American press applauds the gesture. Berlin's rage is real. Willy Heidinger, the resentful founder, detonates on schedule and tries to rip Die Homag out of American hands entirely. Nazi officials fume and talk retaliation. And then nothing happens. No nationalization. No cancellation. The Reich never seizes IBM's German empire for one simple reason. The machines were only half the product. The other half was the river of cards, the spare parts, the engineering knowledge, a supply chain running through IBM's European headquarters in neutral Geneva. Berlin needed the system more than it needed the revenge. So hold the two halves of June 1940 side by side. The medal goes back, and the newspapers print it. The lease payments keep flowing, and nobody prints that. Onson collects the moral credit of rejecting the Nazis and keeps the commercial benefit of serving them. That's not hypocrisy in the cheap sense. That's a structure. The gesture was public and free. The business was private and billed monthly. 18 months later, Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, and Hitler declares war on the United States. Trading with Germany becomes, for any American company, a federal crime. Watson wraps IBM in the flag. Both of his sons put on uniforms, Tom Jr. as an Army Air Forces pilot. Surely now the story ends. Look at what the Reich did next, because it's the opposite of what you'd expect. It did not confiscate Die Homag. It appointed a custodian, a German trustee named Hermann Fellinger, to manage the firm as enemy property. And Fellinger did not loot it. He ran it carefully, almost lovingly. Machines leased, cards printing, patents defended, profits accumulating in blocked accounts. He wasn't protecting enemy property out of sentiment. He was protecting an assumption, one that Berlin and New York quietly shared, that someday, somehow, business would resume. For 3.5 years of the most destructive war in human history, IBM's German business was not destroyed. It was preserved, like a painting placed in storage until the weather cleared. The company did not lose its German business in the Second World War. It parked it, and Poland shows the pattern in miniature. IBM's subsidiary there, Watson Business Machines, kept operating in occupied Warsaw, its card printing shop on Ramarska Street, a short walk from the wall the Germans were raising around the ghetto. The presses kept turning. The subsidiary's most important client became the Deutsche Reichsbahn, the state railway of the conquered East, using punch card systems to manage rolling stock and traffic. That same railway, on those same lines, would soon be running trains of a very different kind, and history knows exactly where those trains went. Until America entered the war, Warsaw reported to Geneva, and Geneva reported to New York, which brings us to the rooms this story cannot avoid. Across the concentration camp system, the SS ran a vast bureaucracy of forced labor. Inside it sat card indexes, and at a number of major camps, dedicated machine rooms called the Hollerith Abteilung, the Hollerith Department. Prisoners were entered as numbered records. Category was a code. On cards documented from the camp system, 8 meant Jew, 12 meant Roma. Labor skills were coded too, so the SS could search its prisoners the way a warehouse searches inventory. A factory needs 40 metal workers. The cards can find them. Even leaving had codes: transfer, release, escape, death by natural causes, execution. And one final category, code 6, Sonderbehandlung, special treatment, the regime's euphemism for extermination, on a punch card. Murder was a data point like any other, field between transfers and discharges, sorted at electric speed. Now the contested part, flagged honestly. Edwin Black, whose team recovered most of these documents, argues that even the number inked onto prisoners at Auschwitz began its life partly as a machine identification number. Black has a stake. It is his thesis, his book, 20 years of his life. The historians who dispute him have stakes too, careers built on precision, and the debate is not settled. Here's what isn't in dispute. The Hollerith departments existed. The codes existed. The SS managed slave labor with machine assistance, and the surviving records say so themselves. The camps did not run on cruelty alone. They ran on organization, and organization was the product being sold. So did the machines actually change anything, or would it all have happened anyway, with fountain pens and paper lists? That sounds unanswerable. It isn't. Occupied Europe, without meaning to, ran the experiment. 2 countries, side by side, both overrun in the spring of 1940. The Netherlands, France. The Netherlands had the finest population registry in Europe, and a civil servant who loved it. Jacobus Lens treated the registration of human beings as a sacred craft, and he had a doctrine. Every citizen, he taught, should be shadowed through life by a second self made of paper, a file following the person from cradle to grave. The physical man could move, hide, lie. The paper man could not. Under occupation, Lenz perfected an identity card so hard to forge that even the Germans admired it. Dutch records could tell the occupiers, with searchable precision, who was Jewish, where they lived, who their families were. The hunters arrived to find the map already drawn. And inside that perfectly mapped country lived the family from Frankfurt. Otto Frank had fled the Reich in 1933, and for 7 years Amsterdam was the refuge he hoped for. Then the occupiers arrived, and in 1941 every Jew in the Netherlands was ordered to register. More than 160,000 people obeyed, because obeying a registry feels harmless, right up until the moment it does not. In the summer of 1942, the system produced its output. A call-up notice arrived at the Frank home, ordering 16-year-old Margot to report for a so-called labor camp in the east. It did not come from a soldier kicking down a door. It came in the mail. The paper man found the family before any policeman did. The next morning, the Franks walked into a hidden annex behind a movable bookcase at Otto's office and vanished from the system's view. They were not the only ones at war with the paperwork. On the night of March 27, 1943, while the Franks sat silent behind their bookcase, a cell of Dutch artists and students attacked the Amsterdam population registry itself, with explosives and fire, trying to burn the records before the records could kill. They destroyed only part of the archive. Most of the raiders were caught. 12 were executed, among them the painter Willem Arundius, who sent one last message from his cell. Tell the people that homosexuals are not cowards. He gave his life to destroy a filing system, because he understood, before almost anyone, that in this war a filing system was a weapon. Behind the bookcase, the Franks lasted 25 months. In August 1944, the annex was discovered and raided, and the family was pulled back into the machinery. Weeks later, they were aboard the very last train that ever left the Dutch transit camp of Westerbork for Auschwitz. Edith Frank died there. Margot and her little sister were moved on to Bergen-Belsen, where they died within days of each other in the spring of 1945. The younger one was 15. Her name was Anne Frank, and her diary became one of the most read books of the 20th century. What rarely gets told is that her story began in 1933, with a father who decided, in the year of Germany's first great counting, that his homeland now knew too much about its Jews. Of the roughly 140,000 Jews of the Netherlands, about 3/4 were murdered, Anne Frank among them, one of the highest death rates in occupied Western Europe. Now France. French registries were older, messier, incomplete. And at the center of French data processing stood the man I told you to set aside. René Carmille, military officer, comptroller, the closest thing France had to a punch-card czar. When the occupation came, he maneuvered himself into control of the National Statistical Service, and with it, the machines. On paper, he worked for Vichy. In reality, he was running one of the boldest sabotage operations of the war, from inside the database itself. The regime wanted a registry of Jews, and Carmille's service was the obvious place to build it. So he built delay instead. Projects crawled. Tabulations stalled. And on the punch cards his machines produced, one detail was quietly, systematically missing. Column 11, the column reserved for religion, was never punched. Millions of cards passed through his sorters, and the one answer the hunters needed most simply was not in the data. Meanwhile, on the same machines, he was secretly processing the records of former French soldiers, building hidden mobilization files for a future army of liberation. He understood the truth this whole story turns on. A database can only answer the questions it is asked. So he made sure the worst question was never asked of his. The Gestapo caught him in early 1944. In Lyon, he passed through the hands of Klaus Barbie's interrogators and broke under none of it. He was deported to Dachau and died there in January 1945, inside the same camp system whose card indexes hummed with the technology he had spent his life mastering. In France, the Jewish death rate was around 1 in 4, still an atrocity beyond language, but a fraction of the Dutch rate. Historians rightly point to many differences between the two occupations: the geography, the regimes, the timing, the hiding places. And one difference stares straight out of the archives. In Holland, the paperman was perfect, and the machines ran flawlessly. In France, a man made sure they did not. Here's the question people always ask at this point, and it's the wrong one, but let's answer it anyway. Could IBM really control what customers did with its machines? Wrong question. Nobody controls a customer. The right question is whether the people who ran the machines had a choice, and Carmille is the answer. Same machines, same customer, same pressure, with the Gestapo attached. He chose, and it cost him his life. Watson chose, and it billed monthly. In the spring of 1945, as American soldiers fought across the collapsing Reich, they kept stumbling over the same strange objects, in ministry basements, in bombed-out offices, in the administration buildings of the camp system. Heavy black machines, some still surrounded by their card files, each carrying a small metal plate stamped with the name of its owner. Read those plates for what they actually are. They did not say property of the Reich. They said Die Homag, and Die Homag meant a company headquartered in New York. The machines had never been sold. They had been leased, which means that legally, through every year of the war, through everything the cards had counted, the equipment in the Reich's offices had remained the property of International Business Machines, and IBM wanted it back. In the months after the surrender, the company set about locating its property across the wreckage of Europe, machine by machine, account by account. And the wartime profits Fellinger had so carefully preserved in those blocked accounts came home too. So, the ledger, who really profited. Through the 1930s, Nazi Germany grew into IBM's most valuable market outside America, enriching the parent company and, through his percentage, Thomas Watson personally. Through the war, the profits accrued under a German custodian. After 1945, IBM recovered the subsidiary, the factories, the blocked profits, and the market position, and rolled straight into the Reconstruction boom. In 1949, Dehomage got a fresh coat of paint and a new name, IBM Deutschland. The same company that had tabulated the Reich now tabulated the recovery. But the ledger has a second page, and it is the one that makes this bigger than one company's sins. IBM also profited massively from the other side. American punch card machines ran the draft, the payrolls, and the logistics of the largest mobilization in history. IBM tabulators crunched numbers for the atomic bomb project at Los Alamos. In Britain, machines from IBM's licensees sorted the coded intercepts at Bletchley Park. Even one of America's own moral stains, the internment of Japanese Americans, was organized with the help of census data and tabulating equipment. And yes, Watson capped IBM's profit on American weapons at a token rate, roughly 1%, and steered money to a fund for the widows and orphans of IBM's war dead, and made very sure everyone knew it. Hold that against the other half of the same ledger, the Geneva half, the parked half. At home, virtue was marketable. Abroad, silence was. Between 1940 and 1945, IBM's revenue roughly tripled, from around $46 million a year to about $140 million. And when the shooting stopped, IBM stood alone as the machinery of the modern state, on every side, in every system, and carried that dominance straight into the computer age. The machines won the war no matter who won the war. And the reckoning? At Nuremberg, prosecutors dissected ministers, generals, doctors, industrialists, the men who made the gas and the men who worked the slaves. Some of them stood in the dock. Nobody asked about the card indexes. Nobody subpoenaed a machine. The technology was treated as furniture, and furniture is never guilty. Watson died in 1956, draped in honors, an apostle of world peace. The record slept for half a century, until 2001, when Edwin Black's team published what those 20,000 documents contained. And here's what I keep running into in that corpus. You can reconstruct the card volumes, the market shares, the factory capacity, the fights with Heidinger, the currency headaches, quarter after quarter, in exhausting commercial detail. What you cannot find is the people the cards described. Not a memo of doubt, not a question on the record. That's the silence at the center of this story, and no one has ever filled it. Lawsuits followed the book. An American class action was withdrawn almost immediately, so it would not delay compensation payments flowing to dying survivors from a separate German fund. A Swiss case brought by Roma organizations was dismissed on time limits. To this day, no court anywhere has ever ruled against IBM over its Nazi-era business. The company notes that its German subsidiary fell under Nazi control during the war, and that most surviving records now sit in university archives. It has never paid $1 of restitution for those years, because no one has ever made it. We have no record of Watson ever being asked, under oath, what the cards were for. We also have no record of him volunteering. That's the honest position, and I'm not going to improve it. Two distortions circle this story, and both are wrong. The crude version says IBM built the Holocaust. It did not, and serious historians don't claim it. The hatred was German, the decisions were German, and the murder would have been attempted with pens and paper if it had to be. The comfortable version says IBM was a distant shareholder who lost track of a rogue subsidiary. The documents say otherwise. The Geneva Channel, the 7 million Reichsmarks of 1930, the medal of 1937, the recovered profits of 1945. Black, who has spent more years inside these archives than anyone alive, boiled the company's culture down to one amoral mantra. If it can be done, it should be done. The machines never hated anyone. That is exactly what made them so useful to the people who did. There's a final irony worth sitting with. IBM's own wartime archive is closed, scattered, or handed off. The record that survives, the one no corporate lawyer ever sealed, survives because the SS kept meticulous files and because archivists kept the SS's mail. The bureaucracy the machines made possible is the same bureaucracy that preserved the evidence against everyone involved. The system convicted itself. It just never got a courtroom. Now look at the package again. June 1940. A medal traveling east, the applause, the man of conscience. What it actually was a refund on a gesture, issued by a man whose company kept the account open. Watson was never deceived about his customer. He was informed, quarterly, and through all of it, in every IBM office on Earth hung the same one-word sign. Think. A word that costs nothing, forbids nothing, and photographs beautifully. The machines were built so that nobody had to. The lesson of 1933 is not that data is evil. It is that data is obedient. It serves whoever holds it, at whatever speed they demand, and it never asks why. The census card became the database, and the database became the world you are living in right now. One question from this story leads straight into the next one. Those camp card indexes existed to manage slave labor. Millions of human beings rented out to German industry at daily rates, building products for companies whose brands are sitting in your home right now. Who really profited from Nazi slave labor is the next chapter of this series, and that video is on your screen now. If you made it this far, leave the word think in the comments so I know who stayed to the end. And if you want more of the history they never taught you, about who actually pays for war and who gets paid, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.